You abandoned me here, with him. Please, you have to set me free.
I will never go camping again. Not after what happened all those years ago. An event that carved a permanent scar of fear onto my soul and reshaped my reality into a waking nightmare. My name is Diego, and ever since I was a small child, the thrill of adventure and the challenge of survival called to me, which made joining the local explorers group the most natural path I could have taken. The wilderness was my classroom, and the skills I learned there, from tying knots to reading the stars, filled me with a sense of purpose and confidence that I carried into every other part of my young life. About 12 years ago, right after I graduated from high school, the world felt like an open book waiting for me to write my story. And so, during that long, sun-drenched summer vacation, I decided to plan what I thought would be the ultimate adventure. I invited my closest friends, a tight-knit group of 6 of us in total, to join me on a camping trip deep in the woods, a final celebration of our youth before we all scattered to different colleges and futures. There was me, Diego, the self-appointed leader, Martín, my best friend since childhood, who shared my love for the wild and was always up for any challenge. Sophia, the pragmatic and cautious one of the group, who always packed a first aid kit bigger than her backpack. Javier, the joker who tried to mask his deep-seated fear of everything with a constant stream of nervous laughter. Ana, the quiet observer who noticed things the rest of us missed. And Lucas, the most daring of us all, the one who was always pushing the boundaries a little further. It was Lucas who, with a glint of rebellious excitement in his eyes, suggested we skip the well-trodden, regulated campgrounds and venture into an old, unmarked forest that locals whispered was best left alone. With the invincible arrogance and thoughtless impertinence that only teenagers truly possess, we all enthusiastically agreed, dismissing our parents' worried warnings as the overprotective fussing of adults who didn't understand our spirit of adventure. The first day unfolded like a perfect dream, the kind of memory you wish you could bottle and keep forever. We hiked deeper into the ancient woods, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy in shifting patterns on the forest floor, and we eventually found a breathtakingly perfect spot to set up our camp, a small clearing next to a gurgling creek that seemed to sing us a welcome song. We pitched our tents with practiced efficiency, arranged our supplies in a neat order, and, feeling like true masters of our domain, we even managed to hunt a couple of rabbits, using the skills we had honed in the explorers, providing us with a feast for the evening. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, we gathered around the crackling campfire, the warmth a comforting shield against the encroaching chill of the night. We cooked the rabbits, their savory smell mingling with the scent of pine and wood smoke. And as darkness settled completely, we began to tell each other ghost stories, our voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers as we tried to outdo one another with tales of shadowy figures and vengeful spirits, laughing nervously at the creeping sense of dread our own stories were creating. Eventually, one by one, we succumbed to sleep, retreating to the relative safety of our tents, leaving the night to its own devices. As was our custom from our explorers' days, we had decided to take turns keeping watch, a sensible precaution we told ourselves, though in truth it was more about tradition than any real fear. The watch was to be kept in pairs for 2-hour shifts, and as luck would have it, my turn was scheduled for the deepest part of the night, from 3 in the morning until 6, with Martín as my partner. When my alarm vibrated silently in my pocket at 2:55 a.m., I quickly and quietly pulled on a warm jacket and my sturdy boots, careful not to wake the others, and then I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cold, silent darkness. Outside, the world was transformed. The familiar forest, now a landscape of deep black shadows and silver moonlight, and Martín was already sitting on a log by the dying embers of the fire, his face illuminated by the faint, flickering glow, looking lost in thought. For what felt like an eternity, a solid 2 hours of profound stillness, absolutely nothing happened, and the only sounds were the gentle crackle of the last embers, the distant hoot of an owl, and the soft whisper of the wind through the tall trees. We spoke in low murmurs about our future plans, about college and the girls we liked, normal teenage topics that felt strangely out of place in the ancient, silent wilderness. And then, without any warning, a strange tension filled the air, a feeling that we were being watched. We both fell silent, our eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of blackness that surrounded our small circle of firelight. And then we saw it. Between the dense trunks of two ancient oak trees, a figure seemed to emerge from the shadows. A tall, unnaturally still shape that was vaguely human but seemed to be composed of the very darkness of the forest itself. Our hearts hammered in our chests as we fumbled for our powerful flashlights, our hands shaking with a sudden, primal fear, and we pointed the bright beams directly at the spot where we had seen the figure. But there was nothing there. Only the empty space between the trees and the deep, undisturbed shadows. We shouted into the darkness, our voices sounding small and swallowed by the immense forest, but no sound came back in response, only a profound and unnerving silence that was somehow more terrifying than any noise could have been. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the dim light, and we tried to rationalize what we had seen, convincing ourselves that it must have been a trick of the light, a strange formation of branches, or perhaps the sleep deprivation was finally playing a cruel joke on our tired minds. At 6 o'clock on the dot, as the first faint hint of gray began to soften the eastern horizon, I started to get up from my seat, my body stiff and aching from the cold. But Martin put a hand on my arm, his face looking strangely grim in the pre-dawn light. He told me that he needed to go relieve himself behind a cluster of bushes a short distance away, and that I shouldn't wait for him, that he would be right back. I nodded, thinking nothing of it, and walked wearily back to my tent, unzipping it and stepping inside to wake up Javier and Ana, who were scheduled for the next watch. I gave them a quick, mumbled report of our uneventful shift, conveniently leaving out the part about the terrifying figure, not wanting to cause a panic, and then I crawled into my sleeping bag, the exhaustion of the long night finally pulling me down into a deep and dreamless sleep. When we all woke up later that morning, the sun was already high in the sky, bathing the campsite in a cheerful, warm light that made the previous night's fears seem distant and silly. We began our morning routine, joking about who had snored the loudest and discussing what we should do for the day, but it soon became apparent that someone was missing. Martin was not at the camp, and his sleeping bag was untouched from the night before. We called his name, our voices echoing through the trees, but there was no response. A knot of cold dread began to form in my stomach as I remembered his final words to me, and we immediately organized a search party, fanning out in different directions and calling his name until our voices were hoarse. But the forest seemed to have swallowed him whole, leaving no trace that he had ever been there. After hours of frantic searching yielded nothing, our fear turning into a full-blown panic, we knew we had to get help. So we used my emergency satellite phone to call the police, who arrived a short while later with a team of professional search and rescue experts. They took over the operation with a calm efficiency that was both reassuring and terrifying, and they told us to go home, that there was nothing more we could do, and that we would only be in the way. We were driven back to town in a silent, police-escorted car, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. And in the days that followed, we were all interviewed multiple times, our stories picked apart and examined for any clue we might have missed. The search went on for a week, with helicopters scanning the forest from above and teams of volunteers combing every inch of the ground below, but they found nothing, not a single footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not any sign of Martin. After a week of fruitless searching, the police officially reported him as a lost person, a victim of the wilderness, and they reluctantly abandoned the active search, leaving his family and friends in a state of agonizing uncertainty. Months passed, turning into a year, and with no new information, Martin's grieving family, unable to live in a state of perpetual limbo, made the heartbreaking decision to have him declared legally dead. And slowly, as it so often does, the world began to move on, forgetting that a vibrant, adventurous young man named Martin had ever existed. but I could not forget. The guilt of leaving him, of not going with him or waiting for him, ate away at me, a constant gnawing ache in my soul, and my nights became a torment of restless sleep and vivid, terrifying nightmares. One night, while I was caught in a particularly deep and disturbing dream, I found myself back in that accursed forest, the air cold and heavy with a malevolent presence, and I could hear a faint voice calling my name from a great distance. I began to run, pushing through thorny bushes and over fallen logs, my heart pounding with a desperate need to reach the source of the sound, and eventually I burst into a small, moonlit clearing and saw him standing there. It was Martin, but he was not the boy I remembered. His face was a sickly, lifeless gray. His skin was totally pale and seemed to be wet, as if he had just been pulled from the bottom of a dark lake, and his eyes were hollow, empty sockets that stared into nothing. We stood there, looking at each other for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the forest broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing, and then he opened his mouth, and a gurgling, watery voice whispered words that would be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. He said, "You abandoned me here with him, please. You have to set me free." I woke up screaming, my body drenched in a cold sweat. The image of Martin's haunted face seared into my mind, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was more than just a dream. The next day, filled with a new sense of desperate purpose, I called my remaining friends, Sophia, Javier, and Ana, and I told them everything, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and conviction. At first, they were skeptical, thinking that my grief was manifesting itself as a delusion. But as I described the dream in vivid, horrifying detail, they began to see the truth in my words, and a shared, unspoken guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally boiled over. We made a pact, a solemn vow to return to the forest, to the place where I had seen Martin in my dream, and to find out what had really happened to him, no matter how terrifying the truth might be. We drove back to that unregulated forest, the car ride filled with a tense, heavy silence, and we hiked to the exact spot where we had set up our camp all those years ago, the place now overgrown and eerily quiet. From there, we followed the path I had taken in my dream, a path I had never walked before in my waking life, and after a short but difficult trek through a dense, dark part of the woods, we found it. In a small, damp clearing, partially hidden by a tangle of overgrown roots, lay a body, and the sight of it sent a wave of nausea and horror through all of us. It was Martin, his remains barely recognizable after so long, but we knew it was him, and he was exactly as he had appeared in my dream. His body found without his eyes, and with a macabre, silent scream frozen on his face, an expression of pure, undiluted terror that seemed to accuse us from beyond the grave. We stood there, frozen in shock and grief, the reality of our friend's gruesome fate crashing down upon us, and after a few minutes that stretched into an eternity, a shadow, a familiar shape that I recognized from the edge of our campfire all those years ago, began to detach itself from the surrounding trees and slowly glide towards us. It was a darkness that had form, a silhouette that was both human and monstrously other, and as it drew closer, a voice, a distorted, echoing whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once, spoke to us. The voice said, "You don't remember me, but it is I, the one you left here in this forest so long ago." The shadow seemed to coalesce, taking on a vaguely familiar shape, and it continued, its words dripping with a cold, ancient malice. "You, Diego, you were my best friend, and when I got lost and scared, you all decided to go home instead of searching for me. You left me here to die." It was then that we realized the horrifying truth. The shadow was the spirit of Lucas, the friend we had lost on a previous camping trip a year before Martin's disappearance, a secret we had all buried deep within our consciences, a dark memory we had refused to acknowledge. The shadowy figure of Lucas let out a chilling, spectral laugh, a sound that held no joy, only an eternity of suffering. "But do not worry, my old friends," it hissed, its gaze fixing on me with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. I will not harm you, Diego, at least not yet. All you have to do is give me a new home, a place where I can finally rest. From that day forward, my life became a living hell, a prison of my own making. The spirit of Martín, or perhaps the twisted echo of him that was now bound to the malevolent entity that had claimed Lucas, began to walk in my house during the night, its presence a constant, chilling reminder of the evil I had unleashed. Every night, without fail, from 3 in the morning until 6, the exact time of our watch, I am forced to stay awake, my eyes wide with terror, as the cold, wet figure of my dead friend wanders the halls of my home. He comes to my bedside, his hollow eye sockets staring at me, and he whispers to me in that gurgling, watery voice, telling me that the one who took him, the ancient entity that inhabits the forest and now wears Lucas's face, already knows me, has tasted my fear, and that I, Diego, the leader who abandoned his friends not once but twice, could very well be the next one to be taken into the endless dark woods.